March 15th, 44 BCE. The Ides of March. I mean, it's a date that just resonates, doesn't it? You picture the scene, the theater of Pompeii in Rome, all those statues watching, guards around, and then, hidden in the togas, those knives.
It really was supposed to be the moment, the pivot point in the history we all know. Julius Caesar walking into that Senate meeting, moments later, he'd be dead.
Assassinated.
Exactly.
That's the moment.
Yeah.
But
right.
What if he wasn't? What if the whole plot just fizzled? What if Julius Caesar actually lived through the Ides of March? That's the huge, almost unthinkable what if we're diving into today. We've got this fascinating pile of research here exploring exactly that, a world where Caesar walks out of there alive.
And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to unpack what that research suggests. What does this alternate Rome look like? How does this one man surviving? How does that change everything that comes after? Some of the consequences are just, well, staggering.
It's like a shortcut, isn't it? A way for you, listening, to get your head around a completely different timeline. So as you picture that scene, that knife edge moment on the Ides, what really jumps out at you? The tension, the sheer weight of it all.
For me, it's the fragility. The research really brings this out. You know, the assassins thought they were saving the Republic, but the sources argue that the second the plot fails, the Republic's fate isn't saved. Oh no, it's sealed, just in a totally different direction.
Okay, let's go there. The pivotal non-event. How does the Ides play out in this story, according to the sources?
Well, the research lays out a few scenarios, but the bottom line is the Ides of March comes and the Senate floor stays clean. The conspirators, Cassius, Brutus, the key players, they falter. Maybe there was a leak. Caesar got wind of it, stayed home, was more cautious. Or perhaps it was just the enormity of the act caused a crucial delay. Whatever it was, the assassination just doesn't happen. The whole thing collapses before it starts.
And Caesar's response. I imagine it wasn't exactly forgiving.
Oh, absolutely not. The sources paint a picture of immediate, decisive, even ruthless action. Within days, the main plotters are rounded up, arrested. Cassius apparently reads the room and flees Rome instantly. Brutus. Well, maybe because of their history, Caesar spares him public execution, but he's utterly disgraced. Politically finished. And the Senate, they just fold. Complete submission.
So the failed plot actually makes him stronger with the ordinary Romans.
That's a crucial point the research hammers home. Yeah. Remember, Caesar wasn't just some politician. He was the conquering hero, the guy who brought Gaul to heel, beat Pompey, promised stability. His reforms, they actually helped people land for veterans, cheap grain. So when this assassination attempt fails, the people don't see it as liberation. They see it as an attack on their guy, and they rally around him hard.
So he absolutely seizes that moment. The near-death thing becomes the perfect excuse for total control.
Precisely. No hesitation. A permanent state of emergency is declared. The Senate, basically powerless now, just keeps granting him more authority. Any remaining enemies, purged, exiled, loyalists get promoted fast. And that title, Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator for Life, which was brand new in our timeline, here, it gets locked into Roman law. Permanently.
And the sources seem to suggest he drops the whole "I'm doing this reluctantly" act.
Yeah.
He fully embraces being the ruler.
Leans right into it. The research details how he consolidates power, and here's a key insight. He expands the Senate massively, but not with the old families, no. He packs it with his loyal commanders, provincial administrators, even guys from lower backgrounds who owe him everything. It basically turns the Senate into, well, the source calls it a proto-imperial assembly, a final of yes men and people promoted on merit, his merit system. It's like an early version of the imperial court, way ahead of schedule.
And he goes after the big economic problems, too.
Yes, the debt crisis gets tackled head-on, like really aggressively. Cancels a third of all debts, freezes interest rates. The research highlights this as, you know, a sign he wasn't afraid to upset the old money if it meant stability and popularity. And land reform ramps up. Veterans get land, but often out in the provinces. Gaul, Hispania, North Africa. It's a way to reward them and spread Roman culture and control at the same time.
And he changes the definition of who is Roman.
Full citizenship for all Italians, finally integrating the peninsula. Partial citizenship for elites in the provinces, bringing them into the system, giving them a stake. And seems small, but it's huge. He standardizes his Julian calendar everywhere. Even time follows his lead now.
So with all this power, all this popular backing, his status goes beyond just political leader, right?
It really does. The sources talk about the surge in popularity that's almost religious. Temples are built to him while he's alive. His face is on coins right next to gods. Statues of him are placed with deities. He's effectively becoming divine, setting up the imperial cult decades, maybe centuries before it really took hold in our history.
So power consolidated, everything secure, and his mind turns to the future. and what the research calls his new problem, succession.
Yeah, in our timeline, his death created this huge mess. He'd adopted Octavian, his grandnephew, who eventually became Augustus, but he also had Caesarion, his biological son, with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt.
Right, Caesarion, who in our history was basically a loose end that Octavian had to deal with.
Exactly, executed. But here, Caesar's alive, he's firmly in charge. Suddenly, Caesarion isn't an inconvenient secret anymore. He and Cleopatra become absolutely central to Caesar's plans for what comes next.
So Cleopatra doesn't just pack up and go back to Egypt.
No, the research is pretty clear on this. She and Caesarion stay in Rome, or they're brought right back into the inner circle. Caesar needs an heir, a direct heir, preferably, and Caesarion is it. The sources suggest Cleopatra is fully part of the plan, maybe even given some public role, but definitely groomed behind the scenes to be part of Rome's future.
Wow. That feels like a massive fork in the road for history right there.
It truly is. The research kind of maps out these two possible intertwined paths. Path one, Caesar's vision succeeds. You get this powerful Roman-Egyptian alliance cemented by Caesarion, who's raised as a prince in Rome. Maybe Alexandria even becomes like a second capital, cultures blending. Path two, fierce backlash. Roman conservatives, the traditionalists, they see Cleopatra and her son as this alien Eastern influence, corrupting Rome, and that risks huge internal conflict.
So how does Caesar, the guy who just survived one plot, handle that kind of opposition this time?
Well, the sources argue that surviving the Ides makes him even more ruthless. He's not trying to balance factions anymore. He's crushing dissent. Forget lengthy trials, think swift, public executions. He locks down Rome not just with popular support and reforms, but with a healthy dose of fear. His control is absolute, way beyond what Sulla ever achieved.
And what about Caesarion himself, this kid caught between Rome and Egypt?
He's raised in Rome, right at the center. Caesar publicly acknowledges him, legitimizes him as his heir. The research really emphasizes this hybrid upbringing. He gets Roman tutors teaching military tactics, law, rhetoric, but also Egyptian priests teaching religion, philosophy, administration, and maybe learns Greek, Coptic too. He's being deliberately shaped, you see, to be the living symbol of this new, unified East meets West empire. His very identity is strategic.
That must have caused some serious culture shock in Rome.
Oh, immense tension. The sources describe Cleopatra's court as like fascinating and exotic to the Roman masses, new foods, new styles, different gods. But to the old guard, the aristocracy, it's heresy. It's a betrayal of everything Roman. So their hatred for Caesar, which was already there, now extends to his Egyptian queen and their son. It just simmers beneath the surface because they're powerless to stop it openly.
And the idea of Alexandria becoming a twin capital, that's wild.
It is, but the research considers it seriously. Alexandria was already this incredible hub of learning and trade. Imagine integrating its sophisticated bureaucracy, its great library, its scientific knowledge directly into the Roman system. That would fundamentally shift Rome's center of gravity eastward. It wouldn't just be ruling the East, it would be absorbing it, becoming something new.
So Caesar isn't just reforming Rome anymore. He's actively trying to rebrand it, make it something different at its core.
Exactly. Explicitly multi-ethnic, multicultural, a pan-Mediterranean superpower. By 42 BCE, that's less than 2 years after the failed assassination, the sources depict Caesar ruling unchallenged. He's launching massive building projects, but his big dream now, the Parthian campaign, conquering the East, that's his path to true immortality, his ultimate legacy.
Okay, let's pull back a bit and look at the history that doesn't happen now, starting right after Caesar's death in our world.
Right. In our timeline, the assassination kicked off 17 years of brutal civil war. Antony versus Octavian. That struggle bled the Republic dry, paving the way for Augustus and the Empire.
But here, that entire bloody chapter just gets erased.
That's the core argument in the research, yeah. Caesar living basically pulls the fuse on that bomb. There's no power vacuum, no scramble for control, no reason for those civil wars to happen because one man is still firmly, undeniably in charge.
So what happens to the big players, like Octavian, the guy who became the first emperor?
Well, the sources suggest that without Caesar's will naming him heir, without the need for an avenger, Octavian just doesn't have that launch pad. Caesar's alive, he's got Caesarion as his likely heir. Octavian is, a useful relative maybe, but not essential. He probably just stays an aristocrat, gets a provincial job perhaps. But the key moment, the opening he exploited in our history, it never comes. He just fades out.
Mark Antony, Caesar's powerful lieutenant.
The research indicates Caesar, having survived one plot, keeps potential rivals like Antony on a much shorter leash. Antony gets honors, sure, maybe some prestige, but crucially, no independent power, no legions loyal just to him, no major commands giving him a base, and definitely no chance to team up with Cleopatra. He's likely shipped off east to govern somewhere kept busy, kept loyal, or maybe quietly sidelined if he looks like trouble.
Which means the second triumvirate, that messy alliance between Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus that basically carved up Rome.
Never forms. Completely unnecessary. Power isn't divided because one man holds it all.
And the Roman Republic itself.
Yeah.
How does it end differently here?
Well, in our history, Augustus was clever. He kept the appearance of the Republic titles like princeps, respecting the Senate, at least outwardly. Here, the sources argue, Caesar, emboldened by survival, doesn't feel the need for pretense. The Republic doesn't die in the flames of civil war, it just dissolves quietly. The Senate becomes openly ceremonial, a rubber stamp. Laws come straight from Caesar by decree. Governors report only to him. Elections. Less important, less frequent, basically just formalities.
But wouldn't that kind of naked power breed resentment, maybe even another plot?
Oh, the old elites definitely resent it. They remember the Ides, for sure. But the research suggests Caesar keeps control through a mix of things. There's still that massive popular support from the ordinary people in the army. There are the real benefits of his rule grain, land, peace after decades of war. And yeah, there's the underlying threat of force. So stability comes through domination, not consensus.
So the Roman Empire doesn't really wait for Augustus. It effectively starts the moment Caesar walks out of that theater live.
That's exactly the argument. The source material draws a really clear line. The moment Caesar survives, the game changes. He's not negotiating power anymore. He is power. He takes the titles, centralizes everything, starts building Rome into this marble capital of a permanent empire. The Republic to empire transition, it happens under him much earlier, much more decisively.
And when he does eventually die, say of old age, the whole structure doesn't just collapse.
Not according to this research. He lives long enough, has enough power to really embed these systems and to manage the succession, likely Caesarion, maybe another chosen heir. There might be jockeying for position, sure, but the sources suggest it would be infighting within the established imperial system, not a total breakdown back into Republic-era civil war. No year of the four emperors chaos, just continuity.
And he's laying the groundwork for imperial administration decades, maybe a century, before Augustus really codified it in our timeline.
Precisely. Governors appointed by him, accountable to him. A centralized tax system, probably borrowing heavily from the Egyptians, thanks to Cleopatra's influence. The legions, loyal to the emperor and the state, not ambitious generals. Standardized pay, pensions, regular troop rotations across the empire. Rome becomes this incredibly efficient, centrally run machine with Caesar at the controls.
And that kind of efficiency allows for faster, bigger expansion.
Absolutely. No civil wars draining the treasury and manpower. So Caesar, and presumably his immediate successors, can focus outwards, that Parthian campaign. His great obsession, it happens much earlier here, maybe 40-38 BCE. Rome pushes deep into Mesopotamia. Imagine the Tigris becoming a Roman river. It becomes this true continental superpower, Atlantic to the Persian Gulf.
The sources have that great line, war wins land, infrastructure holds it.
And Caesar gets that, fundamentally. He launches these massive infrastructure projects across the entire empire. Roads connecting everything, not just for armies, but for trade, for people moving, ideas spreading. Huge aqueducts bringing water to cities everywhere, allowing them to grow. Bridges over the Danube, the Tigris, the Rhine, expanded ports. This Rome is described as almost industrial before its time, just because of the sheer scale and systemization of it all.
And law and education get standardized earlier, too.
Yep. The Julian law gets expanded into this comprehensive legal code for the whole empire. Education gets standardized, too. Latin becomes the universal language for law, trade, science, art. Rhetoric, law, logic, taught everywhere as the skills needed to serve the empire.
Leading to an earlier cultural blending, an earlier Renaissance.
That's what the sources suggest. This mix, Roman organization, Greek philosophy and art, Egyptian administration and knowledge, it sparks this earlier, maybe even richer, cultural flourishing. Think Roman sculpture influenced by Egyptian forms, Alexandrian astronomy and medicine fully integrated, Greek philosophy becoming actual state policy. This society is just, technologically, intellectually, ahead of where our timeline was at the same point. Better planning, sanitation, communication, everything integrated.
And all this together, the strong center, the administration, the infrastructure, the culture, it prevents the weaknesses that ultimately brought Rome down in our history.
That's the core thesis. The political instability, the economic crises, the military breakdowns, the cultural fragmentation, the religious conflicts that tore Rome apart over centuries in our world. They're largely avoided or mitigated here. This Rome, built earlier and stronger, doesn't suffer a third-century crisis. It maintains secure borders, a unified culture, a thriving economy, continued scientific progress. The fall of Rome, as we know it, just doesn't happen.
Wow. The global consequences of that.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to fully grasp.
It really is. No Dark Ages, no Middle Ages as we understand them. What happens with Islam? Does it rise in the same way or at all against a dominant, enduring Rome? Europe likely stays unified under Roman rule and culture. The Renaissance maybe happens centuries earlier or looks completely different. Exploration, it's probably Roman ships planting SPQR standards on new continents, not Spanish or Portuguese caravels. The entire planet's history is just rewritten, stamped with Rome.
Let's shift gears slightly, because it's not just about politics and armies, it's also about belief. The sources argue Caesar's enduring Rome doesn't just tolerate religion, it actively builds one.
That's a really profound part of this alternate history. Instead of the fading paganism and mystery cults of our late Republic's early empire, Caesar, Cleopatra, and their successors apparently engineer a powerful, unifying state religion. It's centered on the emperor, who becomes divine. Caesar is worshipped. Caesarion is the demigod heir, the fusion of Rome and Egypt. Cleopatra embodies powerful goddesses like Isis. This divine family becomes the core of an organized, state-sponsored imperial cult.
Okay, so when Christianity emerges in Judea around the same time,
It runs into a brick wall. There's no spiritual void for it to fill. Unlike in our history, where it competed in a diverse, somewhat chaotic religious marketplace, here it faces a strong, unified, state-backed faith. Christianity isn't just seen as another weird sect from the East. It's immediately identified as dangerous, as sedition.
because it's monotheistic,
Yeah.
refuses the imperial rights, meets in secret.
All of that. The sources stress it's seen from day one as a direct threat to the empire's foundations, the divine emperor, the social order, political unity. So it's not just persecuted sporadically, it's hunted systematically, erased before it can gain any real traction. The cross remains what it was initially, an instrument of Roman terror, not a symbol of hope. And ironically, the very things that helped Christianity spread in our world, the Roman roads, the common language, the administrative network are used against it here, making persecution efficient and total.
And what about Judaism?
The research suggests Judaism faces a tougher reality too. A more efficient, centralized Roman state is likely better at suppressing revolts in Judea. This could also limit the spread and influence of the Jewish diaspora, potentially even cutting off the roots from which Christianity sprang in our timeline.
So the long-term consequence of stamping out Christianity so early.
It's almost impossible to overstate. The sources spell it out. No Christendom, think about that. No Catholic Church as a major political and cultural force. No Pope, no Holy Roman Empire, no Crusades, no Reformation. The entire religious, cultural, and political landscape of medieval and modern Europe, utterly different, gone. Instead, you have this enduring imperial religion, probably mixed with philosophy, Stoicism, Platonism, guiding ethics.
So morality itself takes a different path.
Completely different. Forget original sin, salvation, messiahs. The research suggests the dominant ethics would revolve around duty, order, hierarchy, service to the state, harmony, public ritual, a very different way of understanding human purpose and the good life.
It's genuinely difficult to imagine our world without Christianity's deep influence on, well, everything. Art, law, ethics, politics.
That's maybe the most haunting outcome explored in the research. A world history that unfolds without that specific influence. Europe stays Roman, pagan, imperial. If the Americas are colonized, it's under Roman gods and Roman law, not the cross. Islam, if it emerges at all, interacts with a very different world. The civilization we know, so profoundly shaped by the Judeo-Christian tradition, it might simply never have been born.
It really circles back to that single life, doesn't it? That one moment at the Theater of Pompeii potentially rewriting reality on such a scale.
The research keeps driving that home. Caesar surviving isn't just a footnote, it's the point where history forks dramatically. His legacy here isn't the assassinated martyr, interpreted by others. It's the ruler who lives to shape his own narrative, builds this multicultural dynasty, and creates an empire designed not to fall, but to last.
And the sheer scope of change. No feudalism, a different Middle East, maybe Rome extending right into our modern era, SPQR everywhere.
And maybe the deepest change, as the sources reflect, is in humanity's collective soul, if you like. Without Christian ethics, love your enemy, universal equality before God, individual salvation, what fills that space, the research suggests order, stability, hierarchy, ritual, duty to the empire above all else, a quieter, perhaps more ordered, but less individualistic worldview.
There's that fascinating question the sources raise about Caesar himself. If he lived, would absolute power have just turned him into a total tyrant? Or could survival have actually mellowed him, allowed him to grow into a wiser ruler?
And the answer is we can't know. But the sources explore the idea that in this timeline, he at least gets the chance. He lives long enough to try and build something enduring, an empire based on law, logic, a manufactured mythology, continuity. It's Rome not just as a historical phase, but maybe as history itself.
But even this seemingly eternal Rome, the sources suggest potential cracks, right? Points of future fragility.
Yes, and that's where the research kind of moves into an epilogue. It considers Caesar's eventual death, maybe just old age, illness this time, and all eyes immediately turn to his heir, Caesarion.
Caesarion, the kid of two worlds, now emperor.
He's supposed to be the living embodiment of this new Rome, the bridge between East and West. But the sources paint him as a living question, that old Roman elite. Their distrust hasn't gone away. They're whispering, is he really Roman? Are we going to see power shift to Alexandria, Isis replacing Jupiter, Greek thinkers pushing out Roman traditions? Caesarion inherits this massive empire, but also this crushing burden of split identity, Nile versus Tiber.
And Cleopatra's influence presumably continues as queen mother.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe even as a co-ruler in some respects. Her presence alone continues to pull the empire's center of gravity eastward. That cultural blending feels like assimilation to some, but like dangerous drift to the Roman traditionalists.
So Caesarion faces this impossible choice from the start.
He really does. The research frames it starkly. Lean into his Egyptian heritage, embrace the East fully, and risk alienating the Roman core. Or lean west, become more Roman, and deny his mother, his heritage, the very fusion his father envisioned. No easy answers. Just the weight of that power and that identity crisis.
And history, as we know, has a long memory.
Yeah.
It can find ways to exploit those cracks, identity, unity, loyalty, even in the biggest empires.
That's the final thought the research leaves us with. Failure is still possible, maybe centuries later. Caesarion could stumble. Maybe the traditionalists try another assassination. Maybe ambitious generals on the frontiers rebel. Maybe the East and West do split eventually, just along different fault lines, because legacies ultimately have to be earned by each generation. They aren't guaranteed just because the founder was brilliant.
So even if Rome doesn't fall right away, the potential for fracture is still there, woven into the very fabric of this giant, enduring creation.
Exactly. The research hints that the empire's very vastness, its multicultural complexity, the things Caesar built, might hold their own unique vulnerabilities down the line. A future still unwritten for the heir, facing the long, slow test of time.
So pulling this all together, this incredible deep dive into a history that never was, what's the big takeaway?
For me, it's just how contingent everything is, how history isn't this inevitable path. It's shaped by choices, by leaders, by sheer chance sometimes. One person surviving one attack could genuinely lead to a completely different human story. Empires that last millennia, religions that never gain traction, maps you wouldn't even recognize.
It definitely makes you look at the history we did get with fresh eyes, how fragile it all seems in retrospect.
It really does. To think that on that one morning, March 15th, 44 BCE, if just one thing had gone differently, one conspirator lost his nerve, Caesar felt unwell and stayed home, everything could have changed. The world you live in might not have emerged from civil war and the rise of Christianity, but from the sheer, unrelenting will of one man who refused to die when history expected him to.
And that final image the research leaves you with, it's quite something.
Yeah, that idea that somewhere, maybe in another reality, the letters SPQR are stamped on technologies we'd call modern. That for Rome, history wasn't rise and fall, but just this single continuous river flowing from Caesar. That because he lived, Rome simply never ended.
If this journey into a world that wasn't has got you thinking, if it's made you wonder about those turning points, the road's not taken. Well, hold on to that. What other small moments, other what-ifs spring into your mind? Times when just one tiny change could have sent history careening off in a totally new direction.
The research certainly suggests there are countless possibilities out there, little hinges that swing open huge doors onto vastly different realities.
We've really only scratched the surface today. There are always more alternate paths, more fractured timelines waiting to be explored.
final reflection, the tyrant, the savior, the ghost. In our timeline, Julius Caesar died too soon. In this one, he lives too long. And we are left to wonder, was it better that he died? Or did we lose something grand, something glorious, because of one man's heartbeat lost in a crowd of blades? Perhaps all empires face the same curse. They rise. They dominate. And then, they vanish. But perhaps, this Rome would have learned to adapt instead. To live, not by swords or scrolls, but by continuity. By law. By logic. By myth. And perhaps, in some far-flung universe, there are still people speaking Latin in glass towers. Still worshipping Caesar in data temples. Still building roads, not of stone, but of starlight. Because in that world, Caesar never died. And Rome never ended. Headphone closing statement. If this vision of an alternate past stirred your imagination, if it made you rethink power, legacy, or the fragility of everything we take for granted, then stick with us. There are more timelines to explore. More empires to twist. More what-ifs to ask. Be sure to follow the podcast, subscribe on your favorite platform, and tap that bell on YouTube so you don't miss the next fracture in reality. Because in every shadow of history, there's a glitch waiting to be explored.